call for the WNBA All-Star uniforms to have the USA 250 patch should have thought that through, considering no WNBA players would have been free 250 years ago. The majority wouldn't even have had freedom 100 years ago. Dumb. We know that to not be a fact, but...
What if the biggest obstacle standing between Caitlin Clark and superstardom in the WNBA isn't the opposing defense, isn't the physicality of the league, and isn't even the pressure that comes with being the most talked about player in women's basketball? What if the real obstacle is much closer to home? That question is becoming impossible to ignore. Just a short time ago, the Indiana Fever looked like one of the most exciting stories in all of sports. They had landed Caitlin Clark, the record-breaking phenomenon, who shattered college basketball attendance records, transformed television ratings, and brought millions of new fans into the sport. Everywhere she went, arenas sold out. Every game became must-see television. Every highlight spread across social media within minutes. The expectation wasn't simply that Clark would become a star. Most people believed she would completely change the trajectory of the Indiana Fever franchise. And on paper, that prediction made perfect sense. The Fever already had Aaliyah Boston, one of the brightest young stars in the league. They had veteran scoring talent. They had a roster that appeared ready to take the next step. Add Caitlin Clark into that mix, and suddenly the conversation wasn't about rebuilding anymore. It was about competing. But months later, something doesn't feel right. Instead of looking like a rising powerhouse, the Fever have found themselves fighting inconsistency. Instead of celebrating progress, fans are arguing online. Instead of talking about championship potential, many supporters are questioning the direction of the organization itself. The frustration has reached a level few expected this quickly. Across social media, podcasts, fan forums, and post-game discussions, one theme keeps appearing over and over again. More and more people are asking whether the Fever are truly maximizing the most important asset they've ever had, and the deeper fans look, the more uncomfortable the conversation becomes. Because according to many critics, the issue isn't talent. The issue might be everything surrounding it. And that's where this story really begins. The arrival of Caitlin Clark wasn't just another draft selection. It wasn't even just another #1 overall pick. For many observers, it was a turning point for the entire league. Long before she ever stepped onto a WNBA court, Clark had already become one of the most recognizable names in basketball. Her college career rewrote record books. Her shooting range seemed almost impossible. Her passing vision created highlight that spread far beyond traditional basketball audiences. Whether people loved her or hated her, they watched. And that's what made her different. Every major sport eventually gets a player who transcends the game itself. Someone who attracts casual viewers. Someone who creates conversations among people who normally wouldn't care. Someone who becomes bigger than the box score. Many believed Caitlin Clark was that player. The numbers appeared to support it. Attendance surged. Television audiences exploded. Merchandise sales climbed. Conversations about women's basketball suddenly reached audiences that had never paid attention before. In many ways, Clark wasn't simply joining the league. She was helping bring an entirely new audience with her. For Indiana, the opportunity was enormous. Franchises spend decades searching for players capable of changing everything. Some never find one. The Fever suddenly had exactly that type of player sitting at the center of their future, which is why expectations skyrocketed almost immediately. Fans didn't just want improvement, they wanted transformation. They wanted a team built around Clark's strengths. They wanted a fast-paced offense. They wanted creativity. They wanted excitement. Most importantly, they wanted a clear vision for the future. And for a while, it seemed reasonable to believe that vision was forming. Aaliyah Boston already looked like a cornerstone piece. Clark appeared capable of becoming one of the league's premier playmakers. The combination seemed natural. One player could dominate inside while the other controlled the perimeter. Together, they could create one of the most dangerous young duos in basketball. But expectations can be dangerous. The higher they rise, the harder the fall becomes. As the season unfolded, fans started noticing things they couldn't ignore. Possessions that looked disorganized, offensive stretches that felt stagnant, games that seemed winnable slipping away, moments where the team looked disconnected despite having so much talent on the floor. At first, many dismissed those concerns. Every team needs time to develop chemistry. Every young roster experiences growing pains. Every new system requires patience. But as the weeks passed, patience became harder to maintain. The excitement that surrounded the fever wasn't disappearing. If any, it was growing. Yet the results weren't matching the expectations, and that gap between expectation and reality was becoming impossible to overlook. Because when fans invest emotionally in a team, they can accept losses. What they struggle to accept is confusion. They want to understand the plan. They want to see progress. They want evidence that the organization knows exactly where it's going. Increasingly, some supporters weren't seeing that evidence, and that frustration was about to become much louder. On paper, the Indiana Fever should be one of the most dangerous teams in the WNBA. That's what makes this entire debate so fascinating. Forget the emotions for a moment. Forget social media. Forget the daily arguments. Just look at the roster. You have Caitlin Clark, one of the most gifted offensive creators to enter professional basketball in years. You have Aaliyah Boston, a former Rookie of the Year who has already demonstrated the ability to dominate games. You have experienced scorers who can take pressure off young stars. You have athleticism. You have depth. You have talent spread across multiple positions. Most teams would love to start from that foundation. That's why so many analysts predicted major improvement. The ingredients appeared to be there. Yet basketball isn't played on paper, and that's where things become complicated. Throughout the season, the Fever have looked like two different teams. At times, they show flashes of exactly what fans hope to see. The ball moves, the offense flows. Clark creates opportunities for everyone around her. Boston controls the paint. Shooters find rhythm. Everything clicks, then suddenly those moments disappear. The offense stalls. Possessions become predictable. Momentum vanishes, and opponents take control. Those stretches have become some of the most frustrating moments for Fever supporters because thus they offer a glimpse of what the team could be before immediately pulling it away. It's like watching a puzzle come together, only to have someone scatter the pieces across the floor. The potential is obvious, the consistency isn't. That inconsistency has fueled countless debates among fans. Some believe the roster simply needs more time. Others argue expectations were unrealistic from the beginning. But a growing group has started focusing on something else entirely. They aren't asking whether the Fever have enough talent. They're asking whether that talent is being used correctly. And once that question enters the conversation, every decision starts getting examined more closely. Every substitution, every rotation, every offensive set, every late-game adjustment. Fans begin searching for explanations, and when results don't improve, those explanations often turn into criticism. That's exactly what's happening now. Supporters who once spent their energy celebrating the future are increasingly spending it questioning the present. The discussion is no longer centered around whether Caitlin Clark can succeed in the FNBA. Most people already believe she can. The discussion has shifted toward whether the organization is creating the environment necessary for that success to happen as quickly as possible. And that's a much more difficult conversation. Because once fans begin questioning the direction of a team, they don't stop at the players. Eventually, attention moves somewhere else. It moves toward the people making the decisions. And that's where the biggest controversy surrounding the Indiana Fever truly begins. If there's one thing sports fans agree on, it's this: winning covers up almost everything. When a team is stacking victories, questionable decisions get ignored. Strange rotations are brushed aside. Frustrating stretches are treated as temporary setbacks. Success has a way of silencing criticism, but when the wins don't come, every decision suddenly lands under a microscope. And that's exactly what happened in Indiana. As the Fever struggled to establish consistency, more and more attention shifted away from the players and toward the coaching staff. What started as occasional criticism slowly evolved into a much larger debate, one that began dominating post-game discussions and fan conversations across social media. The center of that debate was head coach Stephanie White. To be fair, not everyone agrees with the criticism. White has supporters who point out that building a contender takes time. They argue that integrating star players, developing chemistry, and implementing a system doesn't happen overnight. They believe the Fever are still growing, and that patience remains necessary. But patience is becoming increasingly difficult to find, especially when expectations are as high as they are now. Many fans believe the Fever possess too much talent to look this inconsistent. They see stretches where the offense appears stagnant. They see games where adjustments don't seem to arrive quickly enough. They see opportunities slipping away and wonder why solutions aren't coming faster. As a result, criticism has intensified, and it isn't limited to one game or one decision. It's become a larger conversation about identity. What exactly is this team trying to be? That's the question many supporters keep asking. Because when fans watch elite teams, they usually recognize a clear vision. The best organizations know exactly who they are. Their players understand their roles. Their strengths are obvious. Their priorities are clear. For some observers, Indiana doesn't always look that way. Instead, critics argue that the Fever sometimes appear caught between multiple identities. One night they play fast. Another night they slow down. One game revolves around ball movement. The next seems focused on isolation opportunities. Whether that perception is fair or not, it's become widespread. And once enough people start repeating the same concern, the conversation gains momentum. That's exactly what happened online. Following several disappointing performances, social media began filling with frustrated reactions. Comment sections became battlegrounds. Fans weren't merely venting after losses anymore. They were openly debating whether leadership changes were necessary. Some posts generated thousands of interactions. Others sparked hours of heated discussion. The common theme remained remarkably consistent. Supporters weren't just upset about losing. They were upset because they believed the team should be better than this, and that distinction matters. Nobody expected perfection. What many fans expected was visible progress. Instead, some felt like they were watching the same issues repeat themselves over and over again. Turnovers, offensive droughts, missed opportunities, late game struggles. The criticism grew louder after every disappointing result. But then another issue emerged that poured fuel directly onto the fire. An issue that quickly became one of the most talked about topics among Fever supporters. And strangely enough, it centered around something as basic as setting a screen. At first glance, it sounds ridiculous. How could screens become one of the biggest controversies surrounding a professional basketball team? But for many fans, the discussion wasn't really about screens. It was about priorities. The debate exploded after multiple creators and basketball analysts began breaking down game footage online. Clips circulated rapidly. Frame-by-frame reviews spread across social media. Fans started comparing possessions, studying player movement, and analyzing offensive execution. What they believed they found immediately sparked debate. Some viewers argued that Caitlin Clark wasn't consistently receiving the type of off-ball support necessary to maximize her strengths. Specifically, they focused on screening actions. For casual fans, screens might seem like a minor detail. They're not. In modern basketball, effective screens create space. They generate separation. They force defenses into difficult decisions. They can completely transform an offensive possession. For a player like Clark, whose shooting range stretches defenses far beyond the three-point line, those details become even more important. A well-timed screen can create an open shot. A poor screen can destroy an entire play. As fans reviewed footage, many began claiming they noticed a pattern. Again, it's important to stress that these were fan interpretations, not proven facts. But the perception gained enormous traction. Supporters pointed to examples where they felt other players appeared to receive stronger screening support than Clark. They highlighted possessions that seemed disjointed. They compared effort levels and execution. Whether those conclusions were accurate or not almost became irrelevant, because perception drives narratives, and this perception spread fast. Videos discussing the issue accumulated massive engagement. Comment sections exploded with debate. Supporters dissected every possession, searching for evidence supporting their position. Suddenly, routine basketball plays became headline material. What made the situation especially interesting was what the controversy represented. Fans weren't really arguing about screens. They were arguing about organizational priorities. The underlying question remained simple. Is Caitlin Clark truly the centerpiece of this franchise? Or is the team attempting to balance so many competing priorities that nobody is being fully maximized? That's the issue generating the strongest reactions. Critics argue that great organizations build around elite talent. They identify their franchise cornerstone and structure everything accordingly. Supporters of the current approach counter that basketball remains a team sport. They argue that balance matters, chemistry matters, shared responsibility matters. It's a legitimate debate. But as losses accumulated, one side of that debate became much louder than the other. The frustration wasn't coming from one isolated corner of the fan base anymore. It was spreading. And the more people talked about it, the more scrutiny the organization faced. Because fans weren't only analyzing game footage. They were starting to revisit decisions made long before the season even began. Decisions involving roster construction. Decisions involving team philosophy. Decisions that some critics believe revealed deeper concerns about the franchise's direction. What started as questions about coaching was slowly becoming something much larger, and the next controversy would push those concerns into overdrive. Because some supporters began looking at the front office itself and asking a question the organization never wanted to hear. What if the problem goes beyond the bench? What if the issue starts at the very top? And once that possibility entered the conversation, the criticism reached an entirely new level. By this point, frustration surrounding the Indiana Fever was no longer limited to game day decisions. The conversation had evolved. Fans weren't just debating substitutions. They weren't just questioning offensive sets. They weren't simply arguing about execution on the court. Instead, a growing number of supporters began focusing on something much bigger: the people building the roster itself. Because in professional sports, coaching decisions can influence games. Front office decisions can influence entire seasons. And for some Fever fans, a few of those decisions raised uncomfortable questions. Questions that continue generating heated debate today. One of the biggest discussions centered around roster construction and the organization's long-term vision. When Caitlin Clark arrived in Indiana, many supporters assumed the franchise had found its centerpiece for the next decade. That seemed obvious. After all, Clark wasn't viewed as a normal prospect. She entered the league carrying unprecedented attention. She instantly became one of the most recognizable names in women's basketball. She attracted viewers, sponsors, media coverage, and new fans. Naturally, many supporters expected the organization to build aggressively around her strengths. But when subsequent roster decisions were made, some fans weren't entirely convinced that was happening. One particular decision sparked especially intense discussion online. The choice to add another guard became a lightning rod for criticism. Supporters of the move argued that depth is essential. Injuries happen. Competition improves development. Multiple ball handlers can create flexibility and versatility. Those arguments weren't unreasonable. In fact, many basketball analysts supported them. But critics viewed the situation differently. Some fans interpreted the move as evidence that the organization wasn't fully committing to Clark as the unquestioned centerpiece. Again, this remains a matter of opinion. There is no evidence suggesting the Fever don't value Caitlin Clark. However, perception often drives sports narratives more powerfully than reality. And the perception among some supporters was clear. They wanted every major decision to reinforce one message: this franchise belongs to Caitlin Clark. Anything that appeared to blur that message instantly generated controversy. The discussions became increasingly emotional. Comment sections filled with arguments. Podcasts dedicated entire episodes to the topic. Social media posts attracted thousands of responses. What made the situation fascinating was that people weren't necessarily debating basketball strategy anymore. They were debating trust. Trust in leadership. Trust in organizational vision. Trust that the people making decisions understood exactly what they had. Because many supporters believe generational talents don't come around often. When they do, organizations must maximize the opportunity. Every season matters. Every decision matters. Every mistake feels amplified. That pressure only intensified as fan frustration continued building. Then another controversy emerged that widened the gap between leadership and portions of the fan base. A controversy involving something far more personal than basketball strategy: respect. One of the most discussed moments involved comments that many fans interpreted as dismissive toward passionate supporters. The phrase that kept resurfacing was the dark side. For critics, the controversy wasn't necessarily about the phrase itself. It was about what they believed the phrase represented. Many supporters felt their concerns were being minimized. Instead of viewing criticisms as evidence of passion, some fans believed leadership was treating criticism as a nuisance. That perception triggered a strong reaction. Because sports fans can tolerate losses, they can tolerate rebuilding seasons. What they struggle to tolerate is feeling ignored, especially when they've invested time, money, and emotional energy into the franchise. Think about what many Fever supporters have experienced over the past several years. They remained loyal through difficult seasons. They waited for better days. They celebrated the arrival of exciting young talent. They embraced the possibility of a brighter future. Then Caitlin Clark arrived and amplified those hopes even further. For many supporters, expectations weren't irrational. They were based on genuine excitement. So when criticism emerged, fans wanted their voices heard. Instead, some felt they were being pushed aside. Whether that interpretation was fair or not, the damage was already done. The narrative spread rapidly. And once a fan base begins believing leadership isn't listening, repairing that relationship becomes extremely difficult. That's exactly what started happening online. Every Fever post seemed to trigger another wave of debate. Every loss generated another round of criticism. Every statement from leadership received intense scrutiny. The atmosphere became increasingly tense. Supporters weren't simply discussing basketball anymore. They were expressing broader dissatisfaction with the direction of the organization. Calls for accountability grew louder. Calls for change became more frequent. And perhaps most significantly, frustration started transforming into something far more dangerous for any sports franchise: disengagement. Some fans openly discussed reducing their support. Others claimed they were watching fewer games. Some said they would only follow highlights rather than full broadcasts. Whether those threats represented a large portion of the fan base or a vocal minority is difficult to determine. But the fact that those conversations were happening at all revealed how emotional the situation had become. Because the people making those comments weren't casual observers. Most were passionate supporters. People who desperately wanted the Fever to succeed. People who believed the organization possessed all the ingredients necessary to become a contender. People who couldn't understand why progress felt slower than expected. And that's what made the entire situation so frustrating. No one was arguing that Indiana lacked talent. In fact, the opposite was true. Most critics believed the roster contained enough talent to compete at a much higher level, which meant every disappointing performance generated the same question: what's holding them back? For some fans, the answer was coaching. For others, it was roster construction. For others, it was organizational philosophy. But regardless of the specific explanation, the frustration kept growing. And as the pressure increased, another debate emerged that would divide fans even further. A debate involving officiating, a debate involving accountability, and a debate that forced everyone to confront a difficult question. Were the Fever victims of circumstances beyond their control? Or were they focusing on the wrong problems entirely? Because, according to many critics, the answer to that question could determine the future of the entire season. And what happened next only made the conversation more intense. As frustration continued building throughout the season, another explanation started appearing after difficult losses. Officiating. Anyone who has followed basketball long enough knows referees become part of the conversation sooner or later. Every fan base believes their team gets a bad whistle. Every coach has moments where frustration boils over. Every close game seems to produce controversial calls. The Fever were no exception. Following several physical matchups, discussions about officiating began dominating headlines and post-game reactions. Fans pointed to missed calls, players expressed frustration. Analysts debated whether Clark was receiving the same treatment as established stars around the league. It quickly became one of the most polarizing topics surrounding the team. And that's where the fan base started splitting into different camps. One side argued that officiating was absolutely affecting outcomes. They pointed to the physical nature of defenses. They highlighted possessions where they believed fouls were missed. They claimed Clark often faced a level of contact that wasn't consistently rewarded with whistles. Many supporters found those arguments convincing. Others weren't so sure. A growing number of critics argued that focusing too heavily on officiating risked distracting from larger issues. Their position was simple. Even if some calls were missed, championship-caliber teams find ways to overcome adversity. They execute, they adjust, they win anyway. That perspective generated another layer of debate. Because when fans looked around the league, they noticed something interesting. The most successful franchises rarely built their identities around officiating complaints. Instead, they built their identities around excellence. The league's top teams consistently found ways to impose their style regardless of circumstances. They developed systems, they established culture, they created habits that translated into victories. For critics of the Fever, that was the real issue. Not the whistles, not the referees, not outside factors. The issue was that Indiana still hadn't fully established who they wanted to be. And until they solved that problem, everything else would remain secondary. Those arguments gained traction after several disappointing offensive performances. Games where scoring became difficult. Games where momentum disappeared. Games where opportunities slipped away. Critics looked at those results and asked a blunt question. If officiating was the primary problem, why were offensive struggles appearing so consistently? Why were scoring droughts still happening? Why did the team sometimes look disconnected offensively, even when officiating wasn't the main storyline? The questions were uncomfortable, and they weren't going away, because every loss added more fuel to the debate. Every disappointing result created new frustration. Every missed opportunity intensified the scrutiny. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't just about individual games anymore. It was about accountability. Who deserved responsibility for the team's struggles? The players? The coaching staff? The front office? The answer depended entirely on who you asked. But one thing was undeniable. The pressure surrounding the Fever continued growing with every passing week. And eventually, all those conversations led back to the same central question. A question that has become impossible to ignore. Are the Indiana Fever maximizing Caitlin Clark? Or are they risking something much bigger? Because when people discuss Clark, they're not discussing an ordinary player. They're discussing someone many believe can become one of the defining stars of an entire generation. That's a massive responsibility for any organization. History is filled with examples of teams that failed to maximize elite talent. Some franchises recovered. Others spent years regretting missed opportunities. The reason those stories remain memorable isn't because the players lacked ability. It's because the surrounding situations failed to match the talent involved. That's why so many Fever supporters feel urgency today. They understand opportunities like this don't come around often. Generational players are rare. When one arrives, every decision becomes more important. Every season carries greater significance. Every setback feels larger. For many fans, the concern isn't simply about the current standings. It's about the long-term future. They worry about development. They worry about direction. They worry about whether the organization can build a championship-caliber environment around its most valuable asset. To be clear, there is no indication that Clark wants out. There is no evidence of any internal crisis. And there is no certainty that current frustrations will continue. In fact, the opposite could happen. The Fever could find their rhythm. The offense could begin clicking consistently. The coaching staff could make adjustments that silence critics. The front office could be vindicated. That's what makes this story so fascinating. The final chapter hasn't been written yet. Everything remains possible. The team still has talent. The roster still has upside. The season still offers opportunities to change the narrative. But that's also why its emotions are so high. Because supporters believe the stakes are enormous. They don't want to look back years from now wondering what could have been. They don't want to watch another season pass without seeing meaningful progress. Most importantly, they don't want to feel like a rare opportunity is slipping away. That's the source of the passion. That's the source of the criticism. And that's the reason these conversations continue dominating headlines. At its core, this isn't really a story about social media arguments. It isn't a story about one coach. It isn't a story about one front office decision. It's a story about expectations. The Indiana Fever entered a new era the moment Caitlin Clark arrived. Everything changed. Attention increased. Pressure increased. Scrutiny increased. And with that attention came expectations unlike anything the franchise had experienced before. Now the organization faces its biggest challenge yet, not simply winning games, not simply making the playoffs, but proving they have a clear vision capable of transforming extraordinary talent into sustained success. Because fans aren't questioning whether Caitlin Clark is special. Most people already believe she is. The real debate centers on something else entirely. Can the Fever build something worthy of that talent? Can they create a system that unlocks the full potential of their roster? Can they turn flashes of brilliance into consistent excellence? Those questions remain unanswered for now. But one thing is certain, the pressure isn't going away. Every game will be analyzed. Every decision will be dissected. Every result will shape the conversation. And until the Fever begin consistently matching expectations with performance, the criticism will continue. Maybe the doubters are wrong. Maybe the organization already has the right plan in place. Maybe patience is all that's required. Or maybe the warning signs fans keep pointing to are more significant than they appear. Only time will reveal the truth. But regardless of where you stand in the debate, one reality is impossible to deny. Few teams in professional sports are being watched more closely right now than the Indiana Fever. Few players are carrying more attention than Caitlin Clark. And few organizations face more pressure to prove they can capitalize on a once-in-a-generation opportunity. The season is far from over, the story is still unfolding, but if there's one thing everyone can agree on, it's this. The next chapter may end up defining the future of the franchise.